We're here at Millennium
Okay, yeah.
Sports Club again. Thank you, Patrick, for letting us use the space. We have with us today Richard Watkins, who is running for the 4th Congressional District seat, U.S. House of Representatives, North Carolina.
Yes.
So I know I did that intro, but tell people like who you are. What's your origin story? How'd you get here running for this office?
Yeah, so first and foremost, what you have to know about me is I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and I'm a North Carolinian. You know, I'm just a regular person. Not too long ago, I was in school myself at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, getting my PhD in microbiology and immunology. So that's another side of me.
Did you know that I studied microbiology when I was at State?
Not at all.
Yeah, so my BS is in biological sciences with a specialization in microbiology and a minor in genetics.
You know what? I was actually just at NC State checking out Charles LDoc, and NC State does not do the last day of class quite like UNC. No slight to the Wolfpack. I love y'all, but that's just a difference that I checked out. Yeah, so, you know, I'm a scientist, and I think, you know, being a scientist running for Congress, that's something that only can happen in North Carolina because you can't spell science without NC. So that's really my origin story, and I'm not really comfortable about the direction things are going in this country, and I don't want to get to the point where my daughter is a teenager and so on and so forth, and maybe she gets an assignment in class and she's writing about the history of the United States of America in 2018, and she's gonna look at me and say, what were you doing at that time? So I won't have to tell her that I sat on the sidelines. I threw my hat in the ring and I changed the public dialogue and the narrative, and I'm really proud to be a part of that.
So if you had like 2 or 3 things that were your take homes, like this is the takeaway, guys, when you think about me when you get ready to go to vote, what would those 3 things be? 2 or 3, whatever it is.
Yeah, so I think there are some really huge things. The first thing is get involved, right? Vote, and not only vote, but run for something. So I think it's very appropriate that we're in a gym because we need to tell people to exercise their right to vote, but also run for something if you believe in something. And I think that's really, really important. My biggest issues, I really believe climate change should be addressed because it threatens all of us. I think we need to close the gap between the multi-billionaires in this country and everyone else because it's impossible to have a civil society with the largest gap that has ever existed in American history to exist. We have to close that so we can pay for things. I believe in universal health care, and I also believe that everybody deserves an opportunity to receive an excellent education regardless of how much money they have. We as a country cannot afford to allow our talent to not have an opportunity to exercise their talent simply because they can't afford it. So everybody needs that opportunity.
Yeah, so you brought up education. So I recently had a sit-down chat with Congresswoman Alma Adams.
Yes, I saw.
Who is an educator. And you know, we didn't get to this, but one of the things I've heard mentioned a lot now is what the next economic downturn is going to look like. And that what I've heard is it's going to be college debt. You know? And so, you know, you're talking about running for Congress. You know, we have a U.S. Department of Education. Of course, we have education at the state level also. But when do we go back and take a look at what our secondary education's institutions look like? Okay, do we continue? So I'm thinking back. You tell me. I'm thinking back to some of the courses that I took and whether or not I really needed to spend time. Like, was that really a 4-year degree? I mean, I'm just checking the box. But some of those classes I didn't need. I mean, they tell you got to be well-rounded. I'm like, but that's money out of my pocket. That's time and energy. So when do we take a look at our education system?
Now. We definitely need to take a look at it right now. I think we have to really start. So let me take it back a little bit and tell you about myself. I've never paid for a second of education, ever. Not from kindergarten until I received my PhD. I didn't have any student debt. And that allowed me not only to seek out the jobs that I wanted to do, but also to make the lifestyle changes that I needed to make. Purchase a car, purchase a house. That's some things that my parents and my grandparents and people of that generation took for granted, but people of my generation, millennials, they don't have that opportunity. They come out of college saddled with debt, and they're already behind. And it's really difficult for people to kind of, get a firm, footing in this economy when you come out saddled with so much debt. And that is absolutely wrong because they're not able to take advantage of all the skills that they acquired. So that's college, and I believe in tuition-free college education at public institutions. I do absolutely believe in that because right now it's really difficult for people to afford to go to college without taking out those loans and actually not being saddled with debt. And that's really the only way that I really see out of that is tuition-free college education at public institutions. And I think it is actually the duty of the United States government to provide its citizens with an opportunity to be leaders and contributors, and that's an easy way to do it. Not necessarily easy, but that is the best way to do it. As far as your classes, I would say to my students, you should find something interesting in every single class.
I'm not saying they weren't interesting. I'm just thinking back to some in particular. And I mean, really and truly, go back. I'm thinking about it. It's 141, hours to graduate. X number of hours in this language. X number of hours in humanities and social sciences, and X number of hours in health and PE. Now, granted, my nutrition class was probably like that should be a given. Like everybody should be required to take a nutrition class. So some of these almost should be check the box classes. But when you tell me, I have to get in another humanities class, and I'm thinking, I'm a science major. I get the humanities piece. Look, I'm a human every single day of the week, right? Okay, and I can go and visit other cultures and probably learn humanities even better because you get a more broader feel, right? But instead, I'm sitting in a class learning about Catholicism, and I don't know, maybe that's why my daughter's a Catholic school now. But in terms of what I needed in order to get that job, that class wasn't it. Do you know what I'm saying? So one question, you mentioned public education being free.
Yes.
Right. So how would you find that? Because in the end, if it's not the parents paying for it, or if it's not the employer paying for someone to go to school, giving them tuition assistance, then it's coming from the taxpayers. Okay. And so what does that funding scenario look like?
I think one of the things when you talk about taxpayers are who's paying their fair share in taxes. Quite frankly, when I started off, I was saying that the gap is larger than it's ever been. Right now, I feel that the burden of saving this country seems to be falling on the shoulders of the middle class, and the middle class is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, while every single policy goes to enrich that top percentage, the people who have billions of dollars, people who I've never met. I'm talking about people who make $70 a minute every day of the week, 24 hours a day. Those people are not paying their fair share. There is enough capital and enough resources in this country for people to receive an education. So when I say who needs to foot the bill, I say the people that need to foot the bill are the people who build wealth off of us, people who built wealth out of the middle class and the people in poverty. Those are the people who need to foot the bill. And we can pay for this stuff. It's just that our priorities seem to be aligned with the interests of the world's wealthiest people.
Gotcha. Okay. So we talked about the education piece.
Yes.
So what about the jobs piece? Because that's, part of it is you're getting an education so that you can become, this adult and you can go out and be able to take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting piece, and it's in two different parts. I'll break it up like that. So the first piece is that we can take advantage of dealing with climate change, right? So not only is addressing climate change needed for our very survival, but addressing climate change also provides an opportunity to provide work for individuals looking for work. Because if you think about it, when you address climate change, you have to do things like build new cars. You have to do things like renovate and build energy efficient buildings. These are jobs that are going to be created that don't currently exist. And so by addressing climate change and addressing environmental injustices, then you will provide jobs for individuals. The second thing, of course, is you already talked about education. But education in and of itself isn't enough for everyone. You still need to allow people to, work in trades. We need plumbers, we need technicians for cars, and so on and so forth. So you need that in place. But this is the next thing I want to talk about, and I think this conversation needs to happen, but it's currently not happening. the very technologies that we depend on for conveniences are making it more and more difficult for us to compete in the workforce. This has happened in agriculture. This is also happening in manufacturing.
Yeah, so this is automation and innovation going from the horse and buggy to the car to driverless vehicles, and so you're talking about truckers probably being out of work.
Yeah.
You know, Lyft drivers, Uber drivers, cab drivers, bus drivers, all of those jobs potentially gone because of changes in innovation and technology.
And I think the risk that we run, and actually the problem that we're generating for ourselves, is that when we don't have that dialogue and when we mention jobs, people aim their frustration at other people.
In the wrong place. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and I listened to someone talk about, and they were talking about kids. And it was, oh, well, you know, every kid's got his head in his phone, and, you know, they don't know how to communicate. And, you know, and part of it is understanding where the world is going.
Yeah.
And the increases in technology are only going to continue.
Yes.
I mean, you know, it used to be you drove up and somebody pumped your gas for you, and then you pumped your gas yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and you went inside and you paid for it. Now you pay at the pump.
Don't
Okay.
go inside.
You go to Home Depot or Lowe's. You can check yourself out. You know, you can show up at your dentist's office and check yourself in.
Yeah.
I mean, you're becoming the cashier to some extent.
Yeah.
But everything's becoming a lot more automated.
These
and as
were
it
all
does,
jobs.
that's right. These were all jobs. Those were jobs. And granted, some people would say, well, you know, Sheila, Richard, come on, they weren't necessarily career building jobs, you know, but in a sense they were entry-level jobs that gave you the opportunity to develop skills so that you could then grow into other jobs.
Don't diminish somebody's opportunity to earn a living, no matter what it is. It's actually really important, and it's an honorable thing for somebody to go out there and work and earn a living and provide for themselves or provide for their family. I think one of the things that's interesting is Katherine Johnson, Hidden Figures. I love that movie. My wife actually took my daughter to watch the movie. It's the first movie that my daughter went to go see. And of course, on the surface, it's a story about black women really being involved in NASA. But underneath all of that is what we're talking about. Right. You watch that there and you realize what computers were.
That's right, exactly. I know, when I first watched it, I was like, wait, I never knew that. But no, you hit it right on the head. But that was the first thing that got me to.
Exactly.
Computers were people.
Yes.
And so now we're just like, we didn't know that.
Yeah, I think there's not going to be a simple answer for that.
Right.
But I feel like in the absence of a dialogue at the national level or at the state level, it's going to be very, very difficult. And we see these frustrations being aimed at people all the time, whether it's aimed at Mexicans or whether it's or whether the blame is placed on trade deals or so on and so forth. That's not appropriate because the vast majority of the job loss comes from this technology. There was a sentiment about, you know, let's rescue the coal industry.
Right.
So from an environmental standpoint, I have my issues with that. It's bad for the environment. But let's say you do rescue it and they're churning out coal. Do you think the contemporary coal industry is going to hire people? No, they're going to utilize technology to stay in the mines, the dirtiest places, never have to. Yeah. And so I think, well, wait, I can't say the conversation's not started because you just heard it right here. You have an opportunity. You just heard Sheila Huggins and myself talk about this, so don't act like you haven't heard it anywhere. So, good job. Thank you.
You're running against an incumbent.
I am.
Who's been in office for a long time. Why you? Why you over him?
Well, I think when you throw your hat in the ring, you have that right. So why me? Well, I think for the issues that we just talked about. I mean, he's done a long time job, 30 years in office. But the issues that we just talked about, these are issues, like I said, that haven't been discussed in the public. And I think that's why me, all right? Not only, so let's just depend on how you want to look at it. You can look at it for those issues, right? My number one issue is climate change, closing the gap between the top 1% and everyone else, and talking about things like universal college tuition, universal health care, so on and so forth. Those are issues that I will bring to the table. But let's talk about it from a point of view of really, really supporting our institutions, right? Our institutions can't support themselves, right? A lot of times people forget to get involved with institutions and think that they're just going to take care of themselves, right? What was there yesterday will, of course, always be there tomorrow. That is not true. In fact, I recently just watched a season finale of a television show that I like called Homeland. I don't know if anybody sees it. I love it. But they were just talking about,
I think you told me to watch it, and I haven't done that
you
yet.
need to, and The Wire. I forgot, and The Wire.
You told me that one too. I haven't.
And The Wire is like old, but yeah, Homeland, they said something
I think
in
they're
there.
both on like Netflix now.
Maybe. I don't know. But they were saying in Homeland that a lot of times, governments crumble and institutions crumble not because of revolutions or something like that, but because over time people just stop paying attention. People just stop caring.
It's a cycle of a business,
Yeah.
a life cycle.
Yeah, and so me running actually makes people pay attention. People haven't had an opportunity to vote in a primary for this seat in maybe 30 years. Now everybody's excited, now everybody's talking. Even if you want to continue to support David Price, which is your Democratic prerogative, you get more interaction with him because now he's having to go out and talk to people. And I think that is what's needed to actually make sure our democracy is sustainable. Now let's talk about why me, other than topics and other than the issues that we just discussed. If David Price wins the primary, right, it's not national news. If Richard Watkins wins the primary, that's national news. That is national news. That brings energy into the Democratic Party that has been missing for a really, really long time. This is somebody we've never seen before. The Democratic Party, its mascot is a donkey. Now the reason why it's a donkey, because that was a joke a long time ago, it was political satire saying the donkey represents stubbornness or its unwillingness to move forward. No. Me getting elected transforms that donkey into a thoroughbred racehorse. It moves us all forward. And I think that kind of excitement, that kind of energy, that kind of national recognition is desperately needed at this time. Especially when you talk about millennials, which I am. I would be the first millennial. Well, I think I'm the first millennial. Well, I am the first millennial to run for this seat. I'd be the first millennial to represent this seat. The most underrepresented generation.
So do you think millennials, you see millennials sort of saying, hey, there's Richard?
Well, so, yeah, there are people doing that. Now, is it going to transform into this huge outpour or a voter turnout? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we've got the blue wave, so we need a term for the millennial wave. There needs to be, and so there's a lot of, I'll say, symbolic involvement and awareness that's going on because of a lot of hashtag events, and I'm not downplaying their importance.
Yeah.
I'm saying that they are awesome for pulling out awareness, okay? Bringing things to attention, but then the next piece is the policy change piece, right? Yeah. And that's really where the work gets done. Mm-hmm. And so the energy and the revolution is there from a symbolic standpoint, but how do we translate it into votes? You tell me, you're the millennial. How do we get millennials out to vote?
You have to have primaries. You have to have millennials running. My whole team are millennials. And so these are people who've never been involved with politics before. So when you have somebody from that group, they bring people into that group. And so with so very little millennials holding any office, it's reflective of the millennials who will come out to vote. Politics are identity-based, unfortunately.
Right.
They need to be idea-based.
Right.
And that's what I'm pushing for. But there is a history of identity politics. And with absolutely no millennials really involved, and not only, there's millennials out there.
Right, but it's negligible in terms of especially when you look at Congress.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
And the question I have to ask is, I haven't done research on this.
Right.
Is it a generational thing or is it an age thing? Because at this age, at this time, people my age are
starting families.
So from 18 to 40 years old, you're doing a lot with your life.
Right.
And when I go to these community events, most of the people are like retired and they've got time on their hands because they've already done all that they need to do. So I haven't done the research to know, is it an age thing or is it a generational thing? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think you just tapped into it just from a common sense sort of standpoint.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about the responsibilities that you have as a younger person and you're just getting started, yeah, it can be a little bit more difficult to say I'm going to run for Congress. Okay, even when people are saying you don't have any experience, you don't know anything about it, you know, all of that aside from what people might be saying about you, there are just
people are saying that?
No, not about you, but just, you know what I mean, just in general, you know, because look, now let's just be real though.
Yeah.
People do say it. Like that's the first thing they say, you know. Well, who is she to think she can run? She hasn't done anything. Where has she been? You know, I haven't seen what experience does she have, you know, and so people do that, you know. But then when you get out there and do stuff, people say, well, my gosh, it's obvious people are trying to run because now they're showing up at everything. And so, you know, there's this you have to find this happy medium on that. But I think, you know, you said it, there are a lot of other things that are going on, and so when you're ranking your priorities, there is only a certain portion of the female's life where you're going to be able to reproduce. I mean, you know, and so if you're talking about starting a family or even adopting, you know, there's a period that works well for people depending upon where they are in their lives, and so that's going to impact, you know, your decision to say, hey, I'm going to run for office. Not even holding the office yet, but let me run, because that's a whole job in and of itself, right?
Yeah, and I have to give a lot of credit to my wife. I think my wife is a part of the faculty at North Carolina Central, an assistant professor. And a lot of people say that, you know, behind every great person is a great partner. She's my partner, but she's not behind me, and she's not necessarily walking beside me. We're both going out, you know, sticking our flag in the ground and making the world a better place through our own ways. And we definitely support each other. And, you know, being married to my wife, Charity, I love you, babe, is like riding a bicycle, right? You know, back in the day when I was riding a bicycle, you've got the bike where you have the handle brakes, and you brake. But, you know, my bike, well, the first bike I had didn't have handle brakes. It had the pedal brakes, where you had to pedal backwards to brake. So being married to my wife is like that. There's only one direction that you can go in.
Forward.
Exactly. So once you mentioned, you know, you're going to try to go out there and do something, you know, she's pushing forward. And it's the same. And so, you know, she's the most remarkable person that I've ever known. And having somebody like that to kind of share your space with and share your ideas with allows me to do the kind of things like, as a 33-year-old black scientist, to say, I'm going to run for Congress against a 30-year-old incumbent. I mean, not 30-year-old incumbent, a 30-year incumbent. That's the reason why I'm able to do stuff like that. It's because of her.
Yeah, and even for people who may not have a spouse, sometimes it's just, you know, friends and other family members.
Right.
But yeah, it's all about having that support network, support system in place.
Absolutely. And overall, my family is really huge. All of my family. My sister, who as a younger sister, I look up to, always there for me. My father, my mother in spirit, is always there. Grandparents, you know, father-in-law, mother-in-law. It's kind of like everybody on board, allowing me to do what I'm doing. I couldn't do it without them.
Yeah. So, final takeaway, what do you want to say to people?
Final takeaway, vote for Richard Watkins. The reason why I say that is because you should always put your chips in someone who has skin in the game, who has something at stake. When we talk about making the future a better place, you have to look at someone who has to live in that future, who has a child that has to grow up in that future. When you look at me, you should see a better future. When you look at me, you should see a wealthier, more prosperous future, a safer future, a healthier future. When you look at me, you should see the American future. We are the American future, and the future starts right now. Vote for Richard Watkins, North Carolina's 4th Congressional District, May 8th. Early voting goes till May 5th.
Awesome. Good job, Richard.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.